relationship breakdown can be both the cause and consequence of men's mental health issues and suicide risk. My name is Michael Wilson. I'm a research assistant and PhD student as part of the RMS cluster. So in terms of what kind of drew me to the area and looking at, connecting men's relationships to their mental health and suicide risk, I suppose it's both a combination of my own lived experience in the space, with also continually recognising that relationship breakdown was coming up again and again in the kind of surrounding research I was doing in the men's mental health and suicide space. So I was really noticing that again and again, in terms of triggers for suicidality or mental health decline in men, relationship breakdown was a really, big risk factor that was just always coming up. And you consider that relationship breakdown can be both the cause and consequence of men's mental health issues and suicide risk. So a lot of the research in the area typically assumes that, mental health issues and suicide risk comes after relationship breakdown, where, the emotional upheaval and loss of social support, loss of, intimacy that comes with a breakup, that can really, affect men's mental health and kind of, it's such a big stressor that it can really predispose suicide risk. But equally, on the other hand, men with pre-existing mental health issues who are in relationships, trying to cope and navigate the stresses of a mental health issue while in a relationship can really, strain the functioning of the relationship, particularly if, one partner is relying on the other as a kind of primary source of emotional support. So that can really kind of, as I said, stress and strain the functioning of a relationship, which can unfortunately lead it to breakdown. The conflict that might come with a relationship breakdown, that can really be, a strong stressor that affects men's mental health. It can trigger kind of uncertainty, depression, depressive symptoms, anxiety, and also shame for some men, because I think, as men we're socialised to derive a lot of self-worth from our intimate relationships. So, a state of shame can kind of come with a relationship breakdown. So things like the loss of social support that comes with a relationship, and also, potentially coping via problematic means like drug and alcohol use, can also affect men's mental health as they adjust to the relationship breakdown. Some people might assume that, for some men they're going along okay, and then all of a sudden there's a breakup and their mental health completely suffers. And for some men that is the case. Breakups can be, in heterosexual relationships, they're more likely to be initiated by the female partner, so it can come as a shock and a surprise to some men. But I think for others, people can start to recognise that their relationship is declining, and that can come with mental health impacts, potentially some months or years before the relationship actually ends. So I think, the end point of a relationship is really arbitrary, and it's totally different and dependent on individual characteristics. But just personally, I've known people who have felt as though their relationship has ended before the actual time where they've said, hey, I don't want to be with you anymore. So it can really, it can be a long-term process, and I think, how it's talked about in the research is that process of grieving the loss of the relationship can begin, some months or years before the relationship actually ends. So it's definitely a dynamic and individually, dependent process that, differs for every man. But I think, the complexity there is really important to research and understand. There's a real lack of interventions in this space that are strength-based and aiming to kind of promote, men's strengths and the positive qualities as they adjust to relationship breakdown. So I really hope that the research I do with, representative data sets and cohort studies and things like that will enable us to kind of bring a clear focus for novel interventions in the space. So if I'm able to find, that things like social support and problematic coping are the things that exacerbate men's risk of suicide following relationship breakdown, then I think those could be really viable targets for interventions from organisations like Movember, for example, to say, hey, we might not be able to prevent the relationship breakup itself, but if we can target these other elements that might be exacerbating the risk, then we can definitely, try to keep men safe.